The French Revolution, How Liberty Became the Guillotine. Paris, July 1794. The hall smelled of sweat, wet wool, and fear. Deputies sat frozen beneath the high ceiling of the National Convention while one man stood alone at the center of the storm. Maximilien Robespierre had once spoken of virtue, justice, and the rights of man. Now even his allies avoided his eyes. Outside, carts rolled slowly through the streets toward the guillotine in the Place de la Révolution. The blade had fallen so many times that summer that people no longer stopped to watch. Bakers opened their shops beside the executions. Children played nearby. Death had become part of the city's rhythm. Robespierre tried to speak. His voice shook. For months, he had sent others to die with calm certainty. Now the chamber answered him with shouts. Some called him a tyrant. Others called him a butcher. Only 5 years earlier, France had risen in the name of liberty. So how had a revolution against terror become a government built upon it? Most people remembered the French Revolution as a simple story. Hungry peasants rose against a cruel king. Angry crowds stormed the Bastille. Then France marched toward freedom while the old world collapsed around it. But that version hid something darker and far more unsettling. The revolution did not descend suddenly into violence. In many ways, violence had been woven into it from the beginning. Men who sincerely believed they were saving liberty slowly created a system that devoured friend and enemy alike. This story held contradictions that history often simplified. The revolution abolished ancient privileges, yet it also filled prisons faster than the monarchy had. It declared universal rights, yet thousands died without fair trials. And one of its most feared leaders had once opposed the death penalty itself. Before this story ended, France would witness a king executed by his own people, a machine designed to kill efficiently, and a political movement so radical that even revolutionaries feared speaking aloud. The real mystery was not why the revolution exploded. It was why so many intelligent men believed terror could create virtue. Before the revolution, France appeared magnificent from a distance. Versailles glittered with mirrors, gold, music, and endless ceremony. Noble families danced beneath chandeliers while servants carried silver trays through crowded halls. Foreign visitors often believed they were looking at the richest kingdom in Europe. Yet beneath that brilliance, the kingdom had already begun to crack. France in the late 18th century carried enormous debts after years of war and royal spending. The crown taxed peasants heavily, but many nobles paid little. A poor farmer might surrender half his income simply to survive inside a system designed centuries earlier. Meanwhile, grain shortages pushed bread prices so high that ordinary families sometimes spent almost all their money on food alone. For many people, hunger was not an event. It was a permanent companion. And still the monarchy struggled to understand the danger. King Louis XVI was not a monster, despite later revolutionary propaganda. He was cautious, shy, and often indecisive. He enjoyed locks, hunting, and mechanical work more than power itself. Yet weakness during a crisis could become as destructive as cruelty. One surprising truth changed everything: France was not entering the revolution as a backward nation. It was one of Europe's intellectual centers. Paris printed radical books and political pamphlets at astonishing speed. Coffeehouses filled with debates about reason, liberty, and the rights of citizens. Philosophers attacked old systems with words sharp enough to wound kingdoms. Ideas spread through France like sparks across dry grass. Then came 1789. Faced with financial collapse, the king called the Estates General, an assembly that had not met in over 170 years. It was meant to solve a tax crisis. Instead, it opened the gates to revolution. The Third Estate, commoners who represented almost all of France, soon realized something dangerous. They carried the weight of the nation, yet possessed little real power within it. That realization changed history more than the storming of the Bastille ever did. Among these men stood Robespierre, a lawyer from Arras. He was not wealthy, charming, or physically impressive. His powdered hair looked severe. His clothes remained plain beside the rich fabrics of aristocrats. Yet he possessed something more powerful than elegance, absolute belief. He believed virtue could rebuild society itself. And men who believed absolutely often frightened history the most. The revolution first tested itself in the streets of Paris. In July 1789, crowds marched toward the Bastille fortress searching for weapons and gunpowder. The prison held only a handful of captives, yet symbolically it represented royal power towering over the city. The governor hesitated. Shots rang out. Chaos followed. When the fortress finally fell, revolutionaries carried the governor's severed head through Paris on a pike. The revolution had announced itself not merely with speeches, but with blood. Even then, many leaders believed violence could remain controlled. Robespierre argued passionately for equality before the law and political rights for ordinary citizens. He gained admiration because he seemed incorruptible. Unlike many politicians, he did not seek wealth. He lived modestly and worked relentlessly. But revolutions rarely moved at the speed of careful men. Soon France faced enemies everywhere. Noble families fled abroad. European monarchies watched events with horror. Inside France, riots spread across the countryside while political factions fought inside Paris itself. Every crisis deepened suspicion. Then came the king's fatal mistake. In 1791, Louis XVI attempted to flee France with his family. Disguised and desperate, they traveled toward the border before being recognized and arrested. The image shattered whatever trust remained between crown and nation. If the king had tried to escape his own people, could he still rule them? The revolution hardened after that night. Robespierre himself changed. Earlier, he had condemned capital punishment, declaring that the death penalty is essentially wrong. Yet as threats multiplied, he began speaking a different language. Liberty, he argued, needed protection from traitors. Mercy toward enemies might destroy the revolution itself. Fear transformed political debate into moral warfare. Then, in January 1793, France crossed a line from which there was no easy return. Louis XVI stood before the guillotine as drums rolled through the cold morning air. The former king tried to speak to the crowd, but soldiers drowned out his final words. The blade fell in seconds. Europe reacted with shock. Monarchies united against revolutionary France. War expanded across the continent. Inside Paris, panic deepened further as food shortages and military failures threatened collapse. And when nations grew frightened enough, moderation began to look like betrayal. The Committee of Public Safety rose during this chaos. Robespierre became its most famous member. Officially, the committee existed to defend the revolution. In practice, it accumulated extraordinary power. This became the revolution's turning point. Under the Reign of Terror, revolutionary tribunals tried thousands of suspected enemies. Evidence often mattered less than suspicion. A careless remark, an old friendship, or even silence could attract attention. The guillotine operated daily. One lesser-known truth revealed the scale of the fear: many victims were not aristocrats at all. They were former revolutionaries. Men who had once demanded radical change soon found themselves condemned as insufficiently loyal. The revolution had begun consuming its own children. Robespierre insisted terror was temporary. He argued that virtue without force was powerless. Terror, he declared, was nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible. To him, executions were not signs of corruption but tools of moral purification. Yet the machinery of fear expanded faster than anyone could control. Paris changed psychologically during these months. Conversations became cautious whispers. Families avoided discussing politics even at home. Citizens studied each other's faces in public gatherings, wondering who might report them next. Some prisoners went to execution wearing elegant clothes, trying to preserve dignity in the final minutes before death. At its height, the terror executed thousands across France. In cities such as Lyon and Nantes, killings became even more brutal than in Paris itself. Drownings, mass shootings, and public executions turned revolutionary justice into organized violence. And still Robespierre believed he was saving the Republic. Then came the hinge upon which everything turned. By the summer of 1794, France's military position had actually improved. Foreign invasions slowed. Internal revolts weakened. The emergency that had justified extreme measures no longer appeared endless. But terror had created its own momentum. Robespierre began speaking vaguely about hidden conspiracies inside the government itself. Deputies feared their names might appear next. Former allies realized that survival now depended upon striking first. The man who had mastered fear suddenly became trapped inside it. On July 27, 1794, the 9th of Thermidor in the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre entered the convention expecting obedience. Instead, he faced rebellion. Shouts interrupted him. Accusations spread through the chamber. Deputies who had once applauded his speeches now demanded his arrest. That night, he attempted suicide. The pistol shattered his jaw but failed to kill him. The next day, wounded and barely conscious, Robespierre rode through Paris in the same carts that had carried so many others. Crowds gathered silently as the guillotine blade rose above him. Then it fell. In the end, the revolution answered terror with more terror. Yet the French Revolution did not vanish with Robespierre's death. Its deeper consequences continued reshaping France and Europe long afterward. Feudal privileges disappeared. The idea of citizenship expanded dramatically. Political authority no longer seemed like a gift handed down permanently through bloodlines. Even the language of modern politics changed because of those years. Terms such as left and right emerged from seating arrangements inside revolutionary assemblies. Nationalism gained enormous force. Written constitutions became symbols of legitimacy across much of the world. But history often simplified the revolution into either pure heroism or pure horror. Neither interpretation fully captured the truth. The revolution destroyed ancient injustices. It also unleashed violence on a terrifying scale. It proclaimed universal ideals while repeatedly betraying them in practice. Its leaders dreamed of reason and created paranoia. They promised liberty while building systems of surveillance and fear. That contradiction remained its real legacy. Perhaps the most haunting truth was this: many revolutionaries genuinely believed they were building a better world. Robespierre was not driven by greed in the ordinary sense. He was driven by certainty. He believed history itself stood behind him. And certainty, more than cruelty alone, often created the darkest chapters of human history. Without the French Revolution, Europe might have remained dominated far longer by rigid hereditary privilege. Entire legal systems, political movements, and ideas about citizenship would likely have evolved differently. The revolution changed how ordinary people imagined power itself. Yet it also revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature. A movement born in the name of liberty discovered how easily fear could transform ideals into instruments of death. So perhaps the French Revolution was never simply a story about freedom or tyranny. Perhaps it was a warning about how quickly one could become the other. And that question still divided historians today: was the reign of terror an unavoidable defense of the revolution during war and chaos, or did the violence betray the revolution's ideals from the very beginning? The answer remained contested because the revolution itself remained unresolved, a dream of liberty stained by the blood spilled in its name. If this journey through the rise and collapse of revolutionary France revealed something new about history's most dangerous ideals, then subscribe for more stories where empires, revolutions, and extraordinary lives reshaped the world long before the modern age.